Good morning. It is Feedback Friday. So those of you new to the channel and new to me, this is my time when I just reflect on the week, some of the conversations I've had with my clients, but also some conversations I've had with myself, things that have been going on in my head. And hopefully the purpose is to inspire you to get curious about your own relationship with yourself so that you get to know, like, and trust yourself more. So welcome. Today I'm talking about questions we find hard to answer. I've talked about on LinkedIn, we've talked about that, someone asked me, share a fun fact about yourself. Other people I've talked about in the comments on Facebook, we've been talking about, I don't like the question, how are you? Or how are you doing? And I want to talk about why are these questions so hard to answer? And more importantly, what's the impact on your clarity and your confidence when people ask you questions that you can't answer? So the great thing is, even though I couldn't answer them this week, not straight away anyway, I wasn't bamboozled by them. I wasn't upset. I didn't feel stupid. I didn't feel a fraud. But that is what would have happened 10, 12, 13 years before I went on this journey to develop a better understanding of who I am, how I do me, and what works and what doesn't work about me being me. And I want to share, so the question, fun facts, the reason why it can be so difficult to answer is because it is loaded, it has got an inference that there are some fun facts about you. Now, there was a time, 10, 15 years ago where I had got so bogged down with life, so busy working as a mum, so busy working at life that actually life didn't feel very fun. And so the question was difficult to answer, one, because I wasn't having much fun and I've lost sight of what was fun generally, let alone anything being fun about me. The second thing is, it is about what's fun about me. And actually, it's difficult sometimes for us to observe ourselves, to see and hear ourselves, how other people might see and hear things. So that's why working with coaches or having good friends who reflect back parts of us that we just physically cannot see or hear when we're talking or learning about ourselves. And then the other reason why 3 years ago it would have been a really hard question to answer is because actually it would have hit an emotional trigger and a button, because I would have been really sad that I couldn't think of anything that was fun about me. What I know now is that because of the way that I process questions, the way that I listen and the way that it impacts me, is that actually part of it is that I tend to want to understand what the person means. And that's a long-term pattern, because I'm a people pleaser. I don't want to have arguments. I want people to be okay. And so I was often only answering questions that I knew would satisfy the questioner, that, if I didn't want to answer it wrong, I wanted to be the good girl. And what I've learned is that if you pay attention to certain questions that you feel uncomfortable answering, if you take some time out away from those situations and think about what's your response going to be, then you can find out the response that works well for you. Now, for me, what I've realized with what do you find a fun fact about yourself is I was worrying. I was like, well, what do other people think is fun? And I'm trying to work out what would be fun for them. Another one is, tell us something interesting about yourself. It's like, well, what does the other person find interesting? My purpose is to say something that's engaging, of use to the other person. When you're simply talking to explore yourself, then you can simply explain what is fun for you or what's interesting for you. And it may or may not land for the other person, and it doesn't matter. So I want you to think about the questions that you found this week. Somebody talked about, how are you? I tend to have a sort of standard answer of, I'm on top of the world. In my sort of professional life, in my personal life, if my husband asks me, I might go, I'm having a bit of a meh day or a meh moment, or don't feel too great physically or mentally or emotionally or whatever. I might answer really, really honestly in the moment. But the reason why I answer that I'm on top of the world when I'm talking to everyday connections, like if my clients start a call with, how are you? I go, I'm on top of the world. There's two reasons I'm answering it that way. One, it is the state that I want to be in for that call, to be in that relationship with them in the moment. So even if I don't feel 100% like that, that is what I want to do. And often I have done something to get myself in that state before that phone call, before that session, before that meeting. So invariably, it is a true state. That doesn't mean that 15, 20 minutes before I was preparing mentally to be in that space to listen to somebody, that I wasn't feeling a bit fed up or a bit down about something, or worried or curious or any other range of emotion. So one of the reasons why how are you feeling or how are you doing or how are you, I think is difficult to answer, is because there's one, the how we feel is very temporary and transient. And often when people used to ask me that question in the past, I would be feeling great until I had my attention on how I was feeling. And then I start noticing the bits of me are aching or hurting or whatever. So the first thing is, when you ask about feelings of somebody, is not everybody does sensory. So if you ask me how you're doing, I would probably go, I'm doing great, because I'm a bit of a doer. If you ask somebody how they're feeling and they're quite kinesthetic, they might have loads of feelings, loads of sensory, and it's kind of difficult for them to choose which thing to tell you about. So they have to go through a sort of filtering process of all these emotions and feelings and sensations. Now, if you ask somebody, how's your day, who's got quite high kinesthetic, and they've experienced a range of emotions over the whole day, there's a massive, like which bit do I pick to answer that question? And so the moral of the story of today is that if you are being asked questions, or you're asking questions that leave you feeling like, there's some kind of like, oh, I can't answer that question, I'm stupid. So if your critic is criticizing you for not being able to answer the questions, be curious about that, because nearly all questions are, in everyday language, have a sort of a loaded, they've got an inference, and there's often a myriad of ways that you could respond. Taking that separate though, if you're having a lack of confidence with answering questions, think about what that impacts on your confidence, and how does that impact your ability to show up in a group, whether that group's your family, whether that group is your team or networking. What's the impact that has on you when people ask you questions that you can't instantly answer? Because when you get to that understanding that actually you don't have to have answers to everything, and not every question, you can learn to work out what answer works for you. So for me, if I say to my clients, oh, do you know what, I'm feeling pants, it doesn't work for me to see their shoulders go, oh, and for them to start feeling sorry for me or trying to make sure I'm okay and reassure me, because it doesn't allow me to be the best facilitator I can be. If I tell everybody online I'm having a really bad time, I like to be as honest and authentic as I can on Facebook or social media. So if I'm not feeling too great, I'll put it there. One of my challenges for doing that is I'll have a post, and like days or weeks later, people will be checking if I'm okay. And actually that was like a 40-second emotional response that I've expressed, and it's done and dusted. So when we are being challenged by the questions that we're being asked, often the reason we can't answer it is because there's an inference that there should be a fun fact about us or something interesting, or that we should know how we're feeling. So that's the first thing. There's an inference that we will know those answers. The second thing is that sometimes we get asked a question about how we're feeling and we don't know. And then like a couple of minutes later you go, do you know what, I'm feeling pants actually, or I'm feeling great. But we just need more time to process it. And other times there is just so many things we could answer. When you don't know how much time the other person's got who's asked the question, we don't know which one to pick, what's the most relevant for this conversation, for this moment. Equally, if you just went for, I'm going to be authentic, often we have to be okay with the impact that will have on the other person as we're speaking. Now, take all that aside. If this is you, being stuck in your head, worrying about how you answer questions can have a massive impact on your performance, and it can have a massive impact on your relationships, which is why you'll see behind me the clean language questions. When I came across clean language in 2008, it transformed my world. Mostly because I knew the person asking me questions was asking me questions they thought I knew the answer to, but I understood that they don't know whether I know until I answer. So I wasn't being asked questions to test me or catch me out. I was being asked questions to be curious about what I know and what I don't know. And that actually not knowing was an answer. So if I don't know what's fun about me, that's information for me. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what's a fun fact about me. And then not knowing gives me choice. I can choose to go and find out what is fun about me. I can choose to find out what other people think is fun about me and then see whether it resonates and whether it's that's for me. I could define what fun is. I could define what a fact is. And then I can decide what that means to me. And what I have learned over the years of being a coach, particularly working with clean language, is that for some people, when I ask them a question like, what would you like to have happen? And I've had 3 or 4 clients this week where this has been the case. I've asked them what they would like to have happen, and they've put their hands in their head and going, oh, I don't know. And it's like that question. They know we're going to start the session with that question. And before we've even started, they'd be like, I don't know what I want. So even when a question isn't loaded, one of the reasons some people find clean language really challenging and find the questions difficult is because they are focused on you. They're focused on you observing yourself and paying attention to yourself. And we're not trained to do that. As young children, we're taught to watch and observe parents, and we get asked questions to see if we've understood what we're supposed to be doing, which is what they have told us to do or what we've observed or what we're modeling and we're copying. We get feedback if we get it right by what they think should be happening, and we get feedback of disappointment or crossness or anger if we don't do what they think. And if you're very lucky, if you've got a parent who's got the skills and the confidence when you're going through your teens to adult, who can listen to you and say, actually, what works for you? What do you think? You might have started to change it. So you're actually asking yourself questions about what you want and what works for you. But most of us go through quite a lot of our adult life not really knowing ourselves, not really being asked questions that make us reflect on who we are and how we do us. That when we're asked a question like, what works for you? It's like, I don't know. I have never thought about that. And then you get into another layer that some people, because of the way their memory recall is they could sit there and think about it and reflect on it for hours or days, and they won't ever remember that. So when they get asked a question they don't know the answer to, the only way to find the answer is to pay attention to it over time, which is why coaching programs tend to be weekly or monthly, because we'll ask you a question as a coach and we'll believe that you know the answer, or that we think you ought to know the answer from what you've already said. And we're asking a question that we think will make sense of what's happening, the current situation. And sometimes you don't know the answer straight away, but over time, that question stays in your subconscious mind, and then the answer emerges. And so one of the things that's really important about questions is to know that we've got some kind of rule that we seem to have come up with, that we have to answer them quickly, that we should know the answer straight away. Particularly if somebody's asking us something about ourselves, we ought to know that. And I want you to be curious about that story you're telling yourself, because I believe, and this is just my opinion, is that we're educated and we're by parents too, and education system. People teach us something and then they test us with questions. And in those moments, we are expected to have learned something and to know something. Sometimes those experiences leave us with shame, feeling like we're not good enough, or there's something wrong with us. And that then impacts our ability to be curious and ask questions and be asked questions for the rest of our life. And I really want to just demystify that not all questions can be answered instantly. Particularly questions that are about yourself, you may not know the answer, and that's okay, because maybe nobody has ever listened to you in that way, where they actually are asking you to observe and pay attention to you. So whether it's a clean language question, you're like, I don't know, this feels really uncomfortable, or an everyday conversation like, tell us a fun fact about yourself, or tell us, or how are you feeling today? those questions, if you are struggling with those questions, the next level to look at it as a pattern level is, does this show up any other place in your life? What's the impact it's having on your relationships and performance? And so rather than worrying about answering that particular question, one of the things you can do is start to get curious about, how do you answer questions at your best? What works for you to answer a question? And when you're confidently answering questions, that's like what? Those are the sorts of questions that if you start paying attention to generically how you answer questions, then when you're asked any question, you can be okay with either knowing the answer or not knowing the answer. When I learned to go, do you know what? I have no idea, and had no story associated with it, meaning that I'm stupid or I lack intelligence or it's just like, oh, that's really interesting. I have no idea. Tell me more about that. So if someone's asking me a question about something, I can either infer they know something about it, but I don't, and I can ask them to tell me what they know and I can learn in that moment. Or if it's something I want to know about, I can go and do some research and find out. Or if I'm not that interested, I can just go, I don't know, and that's been interesting. So with that in mind, the questions today, as it's Feedback Friday, is thinking about your week this week. What's worked? What's gone really well for you? And what's your evidence? Get your detective hat on and your magnifying glasses out and have a look at, what did you actually hear and see that's telling you it's working? Have a look at what's not gone so well this week. And again, what's your evidence? How do you know it's not gone well? What do you hear and see? And what could work better? They're the kind of questions that I ask people, so you can pay attention to your patterns, look at your performances and your relationships, and by getting to know, like, and trust yourself, you can do more of what you love and ditch the critic that says you can't. Thanks for joining us, Bianca. And if anyone needs a counsellor, Bianca's your lady to go and talk to. Because thank you for sharing. And it'd be interesting to know what kind of interesting is that interesting for you. What, if there's anything in particular that's resonating with you? Because one of the things when people talk, when I talk or I ask questions, our own system is giving us feedback. So I was working with a lady yesterday, and got me off on another tangent now, I better go off in a minute. I was working with somebody yesterday and her head was all over the place. So I started talking, but we know that the purpose for me talking is for her to listen to her system and see which things that I'm saying is resonating with her. So we were talking about managing stress and getting ahead from overwhelming to getting back to be able to be curious. And she had a lot going on and she wanted to answer the question, what would you like to have happen? But she said, I feel like my brain has exploded into 1,000 pieces. So I know a process of settling the brain through breathing, getting oxygen back to the brain and just settling the state to make sure. So I was talking, and then as I was talking, I said to her, just listen to your system and notice what resonates most. And she said, the thing that's really stood out when you're talking, Cheryl, is the breathing. And so then I said to her, what would you like to have happen? And she went, I would need to breathe more deeply. So she knew the answer, but she needed to hear something outside to stimulate it. And that's why being coached in a group can be so powerful, because when you're being coached in a group, you get asked questions one-to-one to learn about yourself, but you hear other people's stuff, and that can often give you access to information you just wouldn't get in one-to-one counseling or one-to-one coaching with somebody like myself, or even just chatting to a friend. The downside is if you're overstimulated and you're being asked questions and everybody else is answering questions differently to you, then you can lose confidence in your own answer because everybody else's answers are different. So if you don't have confidence in yourself, being in a group can be really, really challenging. Good morning, Susie. Good morning, Bianca. I'm really getting the hang of this fact that I have to stay on for like 20 minutes before Facebook really lets anybody know I'm here. And yet I've got this horrible story in my head, this thing I tell myself that I mustn't be on here for too long. I mustn't talk too much. But as you both are with me, I just want to, I've just done the feedback questions. I will write them up and put them in the post in a minute. But what I want to say to people as well is that I just want to put it out there that some of the conversations I've had this week are that people are like, it's really good we're getting back out to doing events. It's good that we might go back to sort of face-to-face networking, that we can go meet family, back in the office, those sorts of things. And people are kind of, they feel their sensations that I really want to go, but something's holding me back. And some of it is about, having confidence just to know what you need to be okay going into those group environments. What do you need to make those meetups okay. And what I've decided personally is that I'm not ready to go back. I'm going to groups as long as I stay in the space thing. I'm not quite ready to go and hug everybody. And because I don't like excluding anybody, I can't just say, I'm only going to hug Susie, but Bianca, I'm going to leave you out, because that just wouldn't feel comfortable. So I'm just not going to hug anybody. That's what I'm going to do if I'm going back to sort of professional business meetings. And for family, I've decided I'm hugging everybody. So I want to just put it out there that this thing about, if you're finding questions difficult to answer, one of the questions people are struggling with is, what do I need to be comfortable to go back to face-to-face meetings or gatherings, whether it's family stuff or, if you've got a desire, you want to do them, it's the question you might need to ask yourself is, what do you need to be comfortable to go back into groups? Or what do you need to be comfortable saying to other people, I'm not ready yet, I don't want to do that yet? So there's some of the questions that I've been exploring. I'd love to hear from you. Any questions you've been asked this week that have left you feeling a bit flummoxed and you're like, I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to ask some questions and just get curious with you. But otherwise, have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you back at 9 o'clock on Monday for Manager Critic Monday, where we'll be unraveling some of the things our critic can be saying perhaps now, and some of the stories I've been hearing about getting confidence to get back into groups. And I'd love to share with you some of the strategies that I'm using personally, but also ones my clients have come up with. Hope that's of use to you today. Lovely to see both your faces and your names up on my screen, Bianca and Susie. It's a joy not to be talking to myself. Thank you for joining me today. See you soon.